Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm TX141, but you may call me Paul. Welcome you to another Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be doing something slightly different in the fact we will not be reviewing an aircraft, but instead reviewing a gameplay. My first arcade air battle game since returning from my brief hiatus. I shall be going into the thought processes in my mind as I go through the dogfights that I incur, and also how I try to get myself back in the swing of things after a significant period of time away from War Thunder. Our plane of choice for today is the British RAF's first major production monoplane fighter, known as the Hawker Hurricane Mark I, of which we are flying the late edition of the Mark I. This is a Tier 1 Battle Rating 2.0 fighter aircraft, and I will come on to in a little while the reasons why I chose this plane, but this choice was also inspired by the book I am currently reading, which is part of the Pan Books Battle Britain series known as Ginger Lacey, Fighter Pilot, a book by Richard Townshend Bickers, a book that goes into detail about the life and career of Ginger Lacey, one of the British RAF's finest fighter pilots who served during the course of the Battle of Britain. And without further ado, let us get into our gameplay for today. For today's gameplay then, we are on the ground strike map Desert Coast, using a slightly different setup from that we used in our review of the Hurricane Mark I late, which may be seen using the annotation at the top right corner of your screen, as displayed now. Instead, we are opting for stealth belts on our 7.7mm Browning machine guns, the reasoning being that the lack of tracers provides a benefit against the higher tier opposition we have forced ourselves into. These stealth belts mean that when we open fire on an opponent, if we happen to miss and they are looking for a tracer to whiz by to tell them that a fighter is on their tail, they will be none the wiser to our presence. This also enables us to practice our accuracy, as we need to try and make sure that we anticipate the lead provided by the lead indicator and the additional lead we add on to the lead indicator in order to make sure our rounds count. We do not have the ability to rely on tracers to tell us where our shots are going. We have to get back into the natural feel of shooting down targets. To accompany this, we are using a 500 metre gun convergence, as again we have said that we have up-tiered our plane into a Tier 3 Battle Rating 3.7 match, and more on that in a little bit. But as our opponents will generally be faster, such as a P-47D Thunderbolt which we are diving on, and we will struggle to catch up with in the dive as it dives on the G50 on our team until they actually make a turn, i.e. the G50 and the P-47 Thunderbolt. As we are not able to keep up with our opponents on the whole, it means that we need to use a wider gun convergence, as by the time we get around to get a shot onto target, i.e. if we manoeuvre with our opponents, they are likely to be at longer distances, i.e. 500 metres plus, rather than the more likely 300 metres or so that we would see at our battle rating and tier conventionally. Finally, for our fuel load we are using the standardised 30-minute fuel load to ensure that we can make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. So why the Hurricane Mark I late, you may ask, and why up tier it to a Tier 3 Battle Rating 3.7 minimum match? Well, it is a challenge, but also an important one. We saw in our review of the Hurricane Mark I late, and the review still holds in my opinion, excluding the fact the elevator control surface in the negative, i.e. putting the nose down, is a lot weaker than it used to be. This plane is a highly manoeuvrable fighter, especially in the low to medium speed thresholds of 200 km an hour to 350 km an hour, where this plane handles itself very well and can manoeuvre with the majority of its opponents that are monoplanes rather than biplanes. This means that we cannot expect to use a boom and zoom style of play, which you see here as I am rather hesitant to break into the furball. It is something I do not normally do, as most of you have seen. I will either turnfight opponents on a 1-to-1 basis or a 2-to-1 basis, alternatively go for a boom and zoom style of play, which I prefer. So here we cannot afford to use the boom and zoom style of play, and I need to break my mould in order to build up my confidence once again to be ready to go after targets and try to cut them down in the sky. And in turn this encourages me to have shorter time on target. When I go into turn fights I need to be aware of those behind me as well as those in front of me. That means I've got to try and cut them down quickly, as seen with the F2A-1 Buffalo, and then putting some shots into the Yak 7B, who is absorbing them for the time being due to their stronger airframe by comparison with the Buffaloes. And because we are not a very fast fighter, by our maximum speed being no more than 520 km an hour approximately, and that is in a straight line at a specified altitude, it means that we will have to turn fight the majority of our opponents or catch them by surprise. Again, this comes around to our stealth belt choice or our ammunition belts and our gun convergence, as we come around on the P400 here, pick up an assist on the Yak-7B and continue on our chosen warpath against the P400 and eventually bring them down for kill number 2. Here we snap out the way of a Corsair that is going for one of our friendlies, but we almost went onto their trajectory as well, and we snap around using our superior manoeuvrability and put some more hits into the Corsair along with our teammate. At this point a Spitfire Mark IIA comes in and we come onto the back of them as they try to break off of one of our friendlies. We're right in the thick of it and we are using our manoeuvrability to stay alive and put rounds on our opponents, picking up assists and kills as appropriate. Here a P400 comes around for the head-on and grazes our tail section with their machine guns but not their 20mm cannon. The Mark I late edition of the Hurricane is a durable foe, and that means we can take some shots and we can afford some very small mistakes. But if a significant number of 20mm cannon rounds strike our fuselage, it will be game over. So we have to keep everything in check, and we break away from the furball here because we feel as though we have boosted our confidence as we pick up another assist, this time on the P400, and at the same time we can see that the numbers of enemy fighters are far outweighing those of friendly fighters and ourselves. We now begin to come around, looking at the situation from a sidelong glance, and we can see that the furball is beginning to dissipate once more, and we may be able to get back into the fight. At this point we begin to go back to our normal ways of being more analytical and seeing where the opportunities arise and how we can grab them. We are already getting back to our standard style of play. At the same time, we have to continually be aware and also be aware of the fact we're in a slow fighter aircraft. We have 7.7mm machine guns that are not as powerful as say a 12.7mm machine gun or a 20mm cannon, and this means we need to get in close or to our gun convergence and put a lot of ammunition down on our opponents. So we cannot afford to stay out too long. And here, as the furball becomes equalised, thanks to the fact we've got more friendly fighters in the fray now, we dive down on a lag-free 66. We open fire and cut off their pilot for another kill. With 3 now in the bag, we come around to see a P400 and a Heinkel 112 V5 both going after our I-16. We damage the 112 but somebody else sets them on fire, and out of respect we allow the fire to continue rather than grabbing the kill. We look behind to see the P400 being broken down into the ground with their left wing missing and a fire from their tail, and we break away once again. So now we are returned to the opportunistic style of play and analysing the situation around us. And already through those 2 rather tense moments in our personal experience, we've begun to head back to our old ways and we're starting to build up the enjoyment of War Thunder once again. Now our row in the furball has ended as we can see a number of enemy bombers over towards the eastern side of the map attacking our bases and ground units. So this is where the Hurricane Mark I late edition choice comes into play once again. We said that this plane is a durable plane, and this means we can go up against the enemy bombers, as the majority of them for the battle rate and tier we have selected have a considerable number of machine guns available, but very few have 20mm cannons, unless we see the likes of a PE-8. We can see here an enemy TBF chasing down an LA-5, a little bit awkward, I thought that myself at first, but it happens every so often. Much like the B-25 is America's finest fighter, at its battle rating and tier it would seem in some cases, and we break down onto the TBF, getting a couple of hits but nothing major, and we have to come around once again. We come down dead in line with the TBF and realise that rear facing pair of 12.7mm machine guns in the rear turret will be very dangerous for our plane, so we come underneath and face a single 12.7 instead, utilising our durability, our large amount of ammunition which we have expended now, or almost expended down to 195 rounds, in order to finish off the TBF and pick up our 4th kill. So we're getting used to the traits of planes, i.e. the durability, how to hunt bombers, i.e. we want to avoid going into situations where we've got their maximum firepower from their turrets available to hit us, and at the same time we're trying to get the job done as quickly as possible, which is why we closed in, using our 500m gun convergence to make sure all the rounds could strike the plane across the fuselage rather than just a singular point, which is the opposite mindset that we use against bombers, as we have highlighted on a number of occasions. We now go after a B-25 Mitchell and we will take the same approach, striking from the left hand beam, and we break underneath because we know if we come down from above, 250 caliber turrets will be aiming at us, not just the rear one here, although we break under it every so often, but the B-25 starts to get away from us because it is a fast bomber by comparison with our own fighter. Fortunately for us, we set the B-25 on fire in order to pick up what will be our first ace in a day. But at the same time we can see here how we need to be effective at knocking out the bomber, as otherwise as they pull away, the 50 caliber turrets come to life and become more effective at increasing range as the B-25 gets further away, and our 7.7mm Browning machine guns become less effective due to their lower muzzle velocity, and the situation turns in favour of our foe rather than us. So we are relearning the need to bring down our opponents as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible, whilst at the same time making sure we exploit the traits of our aircraft, which here are durability and large ammo capacity, whilst earlier we utilised our great manoeuvrability at low to medium speed. So with that in hand, we have picked up our ace in the day as already said, and we now begin to meander around the map. The game is entering its closing stages, and unfortunately it would seem that a good portion of our team are now more focused on attacking low altitude targets rather than the bombers. And with our bases being knocked out by a significant number of enemy bombers, we need to continue the effort to bring down the enemy war machine up high in the sky, rather than go for the furballing tactics of earlier. We have had our fill, and now we need to change our approach. We've already dispatched a Mitchell, and now we're hoping to take down the AR-2. Although because of our weaker climb rate, we now have to focus on anticipating the flight path of the AR-2. We know we cannot possibly catch them after their first bombing run, so instead we are flying away towards their spawn so that we may come up and come around. But in doing so we have spotted a Focke-Wulf 200C, a Condor, and we are now going to go for the Condor instead and echo this anticipation, an old trick of mine in my books. The idea being here we fly away from the Condor and fly along their flight path, building altitude and building speed. In doing so we can cut off the Condor's flight path and then bring them down before they can strike our bases, or so that they may only get one run at our bases rather than multiple. If we flew towards them we would have to come up directly underneath them, decreasing our convergence time. The AR-2 seems to be being harassed by a friendly Ki-44, while a friendly Ki-44 is making their way to the AR-2, so for the time being we're going to leave the AR-2 out of the picture. The Condor is gradually getting closer to us, which would be expected, because they have a decent top speed by comparison with our own. They are most likely doing approximately 320 km an hour right now, and as we break up to 3000 meters altitude and keep going, we remember how the engine performance of the Hurricane Mark 1 Late Edition begins to peter out as you go to higher altitudes, as it is an earlier iteration of the Merlin engine. But we've put enough distance between us and the Condor and gained enough altitude so that in our next wet stage, or 110% engine power stage, we will be able to charge up to the Condor and cut them down, or at least hope to do a significant amount of damage as we break onto them. We are setting up the situation, we begin to put the nose up, engine at maximum power, we get the Condor on our sights, and we open fire. Gradually cut in, we can see here that our 7.7mm machine guns do not do enough damage, but we can break up underneath the Condor and use our durability in order to make sure we survive as we finish them off. They explode in midair, and we pick up our 6th kill as they only managed to pull off one bombing run. But in doing this, the AR-2 has had to come back along our flight path and the Condor's flight path, and we begin to open fire. Unfortunately the game ends in our favour, but we believe that we could have done a lot more damage to the AR-2 if the game had not ended, and utilised this approach to great effect. In review, we can see that our 6 kills and 2 assists allowed us to pick up 8,160 silver lions and 2,701 research points. This was all achieved through a mixture of going outside of our comfort zone intentionally and using tactics of old. We immediately went outside of our comfort zone by diving into the midst of 2 furbals. In doing so we reinvigorated our enjoyment of War Thunder's air arcade battles. At the same time however, we also built up our thirst for getting the ace in the day, i.e. when we are surrounded by enemy planes which we want to bring down. But we have to temper this with the concept of spatial awareness and implementing this, not just to be aware of when foes are going to drift into our gun sight, or when we are going to drift into their gun sight, but also in being aware of the fact that friends and foes will leave and enter the furball in any given moment. And we all know, or we should all be gradually becoming aware of the fact that a furball can go from being contested to in one team's favour in just a couple of seconds. And if we had not left the furball, i.e. the first one, when we did, in my personal opinion, it is very likely we would have been shot down or wounded and had to return to the airfield. but by leaving at the right moment and then swinging back into the second furball for further opportunities, we managed to increase our score and then gradually break out and feel excited in the fact we'd now preached the tactics of old. Something we would usually do in a Tier 3 battle rating 3.7 aircraft, such as a Messerschmitt 109 F4, which is go bomber hunting, in order to help our team win the game, as the ground targets are crucial in a ground strike game. We brought down, in order, a TBF, a B-25 and a Focke-Wulf 200, and we did this utilising our great durability and sheer amount of ammunition in the Hurricane Mark 1 late edition, but also made sure to limit our exposure to return fire from the bomber's turrets, only taking the damage when necessary and preventing the likelihood of our pilot being knocked out, a piece of our fuselage snapping off or catching fire. And in doing so and following all this through and trying to bring back our tactics of old and at the same time build up our concepts of spatial awareness and our enjoyment of the game, we came third by comparison to the rest of our team. It could be debated that we would have done better in terms of our overall score if we had flown something at the tier and battle rating we flew at, but as always, the Hurricane Mark 1 late edition has shown itself to be a dependable fighter, much like it was in the Battle of Britain, and this indeed just goes to show, or at least in my personal opinion, and what I thought at the end of this game, that no matter how long you are away, whether it is from school after a school holiday, from work after a brief break, or alternatively from War Thunder after a house move, after 1 or 2 games, or in the case of us just the one, it feels just like yesterday. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a happy new year, and as always, take care, and good luck in the skies!